She swam over 100 miles from Cuba to Florida at the age of 64. My name is Kaitlin Moose, and you're watching 50 Shades of Great. Yes, I'm talking about marathon swimmer and all-around inspiring gal, Nyad. She is the first person to complete the unaided swim from Cuba to Key West. That's 111 miles in the open ocean with sharks and jellyfish and the strong currents of the Gulf Stream. It took her almost 53 hours, to be exact 52 hours, 54 minutes, and 18 seconds of continuous swimming. That's over 2 days of swimming with no rest on a boat or anything. And did I mention she did it all at the age of 64? She is quickly becoming one of my favorite human beings ever. I was first introduced to Diana's story when I stumbled across her very incredible and funny TED Talk, which I've linked down below. And then I read her book called Find a Way. It's all about her life and each attempt to cross from Cuba to Florida and finally finishing on that 5th try. So completing this swim has been a lifelong dream of hers. When she was 5, her father showed her their last name in the dictionary, Nyad. In Greek mythology, that meant nymphs who swim in lakes, oceans, and rivers to protect the waters for the gods. And in the modern language, it means a girl or woman champion swimmer. Then when she was 9, many Cubans were fleeing their country and entering into the US. From their home in Fort Lauderdale, she asked her mom, "Where is Cuba?" And her mom pointed out and said, "There. You can't see it, but it's right over there. It's so close you could almost swim to it." So by age 10, she was swimming on the school team and was relentless in her workouts. She was up at the crack of dawn and getting home really late from school. She was truly committed to her workouts, but a lot of that was to avoid going home, where her father had been molesting her ever since she was a small child. And she was trying to escape that by focusing on her swimming. And there, her swimming coach was the only man for years that she felt she could trust, which made it all the more shocking and unbearable when he sexually assaulted her at the age of 14. And I have to read this passage for you. Right after the attack was the same day as the state championship swimming meet. She lost and felt completely numb, and she says, "I swam to the bottom of the diving well, sobbed silent, bitter tears, and screamed at the top of my lungs, 'This is not going to ruin my life.' I do believe that moment, that night, 16 feet underwater in my high school pool, was when I turned my back forever on the concept of destiny. Being molested wasn't my fate. This was the moment I decided being a champion wasn't my destiny either. Hard work and focus and will would shape my future. Nothing was meant to be." And the coach continued to molest her, and she was so ashamed she didn't tell anyone. It wasn't until years later that she met up with an old swim mate and found out that the exact same thing had happened to her. It turns out that many other girls had been molested by this man. He worked in many different swim programs, many different schools, and he was never prosecuted. So she took up marathon swimming. Those races are anywhere from 10 miles to 25 miles. And then she completed her first solo swim through the freezing waters of Lake Ontario. And that took 18 hours and 20 minutes. So you're getting a sense for how long these swims last. She actually said she almost drowned on a training swim in Lake Ontario because the waters were so cold that her body went into shock. She was actually rescued by a guy on a fishing boat. He pulled her out of the water, and she was so cold that just his skin, his hands touching her skin, burned her. And she had scars on her shoulders from where he picked her up for, she said, like a good 20 years before those scars began to fade. So these are the kinds of conditions that she's swimming in. She then became the first woman, and she broke the speed record for swimming around Manhattan Island, which she did in 7 hours and 57 minutes. Then she really, really wanted to complete a 100-mile swim, even though no one had even completed half that distance. So Cuba to Florida became her extreme dream. So when you're talking about a swim like this, you are surrounded by a team, but in order for it to count as an unaided solo swim, nobody can touch you. You can't rest on the boat at all. You can't swim with a shark cage, and you can't have any kind of fabric that might help you float. But she does have a team. This includes the navigator, who's going to keep them on course, take into account currents and the swimmer's speed, all these different things. She has handlers that pass her food and water and offer encouragement when she's at her lowest points. She has shark experts to help keep her safe. They enlisted a jellyfish expert because on a previous attempt, she'd been stung by a box jellyfish, and their stings can be fatal.
Box jellyfish are the most dangerous marine organism, full stop. There's been more loss of life in the last 40 years due to box jellyfish envenomation than shark attack or any other marine threat.
So for her final and successful swim, she spent a year with a prosthetics expert and an orthodontist to construct this big silicone face jellyfish mask. As you can see, there are a lot of different variables between the weather, the currents, and the wildlife, and Diana's abilities and mindset. A lot can go wrong. There's also a huge factor of time. You have to reach the other shore before you lose too much weight and water and your vital organs shut down. Her first attempt was at the age of 28, and they were blown so far off course that they couldn't reach Florida, and she lost 29 pounds in 2 days of swimming. So after that, she set the record for long distance swimming by swimming 102.5 miles from the Bahamas to Florida, which were in easier waters. And after that, she retired. She stopped swimming, and she didn't swim another stroke for 30 years. But then her mom passed away when Diana was 58, and she kind of started to realize her life was slipping by, and that dream, that extreme dream of the Cuba to Florida crossing, was rekindled. So she began training again, and it is insane to hear about all these different 15-hour swims that she did just in training and preparing her body and steeling her mind and stomach. You have all the waves as well as the salt water can make it much more difficult. She injures her shoulder. It's difficult and time-consuming to get government approval from both the US and Cuba, and then it's difficult to get a team together of all these experts and people that are willing to give up their time and go. And the biggest factor probably in a lot of her crossings was waiting for a weather prediction that would allow her for 3 days of the best conditions possible in the warmest waters possible. She tried and failed 3 more times in her early 60s, and everyone said it couldn't be done. It was impossible. She needed to give up, find a new dream, because this just simply could not be done. I mean, by this time, it's decades later, other swimmers have tried and failed as well. She herself had almost died from these box jellyfish stings that hadn't been a problem. They weren't in those waters back in her 20s. So now this is a new problem she's encountered in her 60s, and each attempt illuminates a new obstacle that they're faced with, whether it's the jellyfish or the storms. And she met with experts and created new solutions, but people still said it just wasn't enough. It can't be done. However, as we know, she doesn't give up. She keeps training and just has the faith that things will come together in a year when it's time to try again. She works with people over the year to create that jellyfish mask. She slowly but surely gets her team back together for one last try. And on August 31st, 2013, at the age of 64, she sets off from that Cuban shore for the 5th and final time. And the swim is going well. They're making good time, but she starts to lose mental clarity. She's hallucinating. She thinks she sees the Taj Mahal, but they have a rule on her team that no one can tell her how far out they are or how close to Florida they are, because so much can happen in the hours between then and getting to the destination. But Bonnie can see that she's just hanging on by a thread. She's about to lose it, so Bonnie calls her over to the boat. Bonnie is her head handler and best friend, and she says, "I want you to look up and see those lights." And Diana gets all excited. She's like, "Oh my goodness, it's morning." And morning swimming in the daytime is a lot easier than swimming in the pitch black of night.
And I saw a stream of white light along the horizon, and I said, "It's going to be morning soon." She said, "No, those are the lights of Key West."
And I'm just like, tears. It's so emotional. I cried so many times reading this book and just going through her story, because it's so much that her bravery and willpower and belief in herself and her team. It's so beautiful. And so she finally makes it to shore, and her team has to form this human wall around her, because she has to make it all the way to dry land and before anyone can touch her. Otherwise it won't count as an unaided swim. So they're all trying to make this human wall to keep people back because the public has shown up to offer congratulations and the press is there and everyone is yelling and her arms and legs are swollen from all this salt water and she's stumbling, she's just exhausted, and finally reaches that dry land and collapses into a hug into her best friend Bonnie's arms, and it is the best moment. That's after swimming continuously for 111 miles. That's 53 hours. And she gets up on that beach and she says 3 things. 1, never ever give up. 2, you're never too old to chase your dreams. And 3, it looks like a solitary sport, but it's a team. I'm so honored to be able to share her story with you. I find it so inspiring. Thank you so much for watching, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. And I will see you guys next Wednesday for another 50 Shades of Great.